We did speak to Lord Macdonald, who was the Director of Public Prosecutions before Keir Starmer, I should say, and we asked him a bit about Labour's long-term plan. Have a listen to this. Do you think the analysis that we've seen today from the Justice Secretary, the brink of disaster, talk of civil disorder, do you think that's fair?
I think it's completely warranted, and I don't think it's apocalyptic at all. This is a catastrophic failure of public policy that's been in the making for many years, over many governments. It's a increased sentencing, the lowering of remission, new offences, the increasing of tariffs. That's to say, the amount of time that people stay in prison, so that we've had a growing prison population, by far the largest in Western Europe, and we haven't built the prisons to keep people in. So we would face a situation in which people sentenced by the courts to terms of imprisonment would have no cells to go to, which would mean the police would have to stop arresting people, the courts would have to stop processing them, and we'd have criminal justice meltdown. So I think her language was well warranted. I think she had no choice. The previous government was very well aware of this situation. Indeed, Alex Clark, the former Secretary of State for Justice, was trying to persuade the former Prime Minister to do exactly this, and the Prime Minister wouldn't, because it was regarded as bad electoral politics. So this has been dumped in Shabana Mahmood's lap, and she's done, I think, the only thing that she could do in order to salvage something from this disaster.
Do you think it's fair of Shabana Mahmood to basically blame the last Conservative government, given, as you say, this stretches back much further, this is about building prisons, etc., over a long period of time?
Yeah. It stretches back to the last Labour government as well. I mean, sentences have been ratcheted up for years and years and years. We've had a sort of arms race between the two major parties: who can talk toughest on crime, who can get more people in prison, who can pass the longest sentences. The problem is, building your way out of this is a terribly expensive thing to do. When you build a new prison, each new cell takes no less than £630,000 of capital expenditure. £630,000 per cell. So at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself whether you want to build prisons or whether you want to build hospitals, whether you want to build prisons or whether you want to build schools. I think that what we need is a completely new approach to crime and punishment and penal policy. And actually, I think there's been a big tell from this government. I think Keir Starmer's appointment of James Timpson, the well-known prison reformer, as prisons minister, is a real tell that Keir Starmer wants to go further than this. This is a sticking plaster policy. These releases will give us 18 months of space. I think what the government wants to do is to go further and take a much broader look at the way we deal with sentencing and prisons and people who commit crimes. And I think we're going to see more moves in the future.
It's really interesting. It sort of jumps ahead to my next question, because I was going to ask, I mean, do you think that this new Labour government is going to have a different approach to who actually goes to prison? And do you think it could be sort of more focused on rehabilitation rather than retribution? And is that a good thing?
Well, James Timpson, his view, and he's said this on more than one occasion, is that only about a third of the people in prison at the moment need to be in prison. These are the dangerous offenders, the people we need to be protected from because they're dangerous. He says there's another third who should be out in the community getting therapeutic interventions for drug addiction, for mental health and so on, and another third who should be out in the community getting community sentences. Now, Keir Starmer is a careful guy. I know Keir Starmer. He's a careful person. He likes to plan ahead. He likes to do things step by step. There is no way, in my view, that Keir Starmer would have appointed James Timpson as prisons minister without thinking very carefully about what it was that James Timpson was going to be likely to want to do and what he'd support. And that suggests to me that Keir Starmer has appointed him for that reason. He knows what James Timpson thinks. And that appointment tells me that we're going to see a different approach from this government to crime and punishment, much more focus on rehabilitation, much more focus on treatment and punishment in the community, and less focus on prisons.
You talked about the kind of politics. I mean, do you worry that there'll end up being a political backlash to that if it's seen to be less tough, I guess?
Yeah, well, the real risk for the government is that someone or some people who are released early commit serious offences during their period of early release. That's when a backlash starts. If someone's released a few weeks before they would have been in the absence of this policy, and during those few weeks of freedom that they've been granted, they commit a serious crime, that's going to cause a backlash. So there are obviously grave political risks and grave risks to people who might be harmed in that situation. But we've got no choice at the moment. This policy has to be enacted because we simply haven't got the cells into which to put people, and that's a failure, as I said, of successive governments. But in the end, at the end, one has to ask the question about whether the vast expense of prisons is a good way of spending public money. If you take two cohorts of people who commit similar offences, one cohort sent to prison, the other put into community rehabilitative measures, the ones who go to prison have a far higher recidivism rate of reoffending when they're released than those who are on rehabilitative provisions in the community. So prison is not just unbelievably expensive as an option for society, it also doesn't work. It works less well for those sorts of people who are better suited to therapeutic interventions, to community service, to punishment in the community. So it's a double whammy. It costs more and it doesn't work.
Yeah, it feels like it's really important to talk about this kind of long-term impacts, but I guess in terms of the immediate crisis that we've been talking about today, and you touched on this as well, do you think there is inevitably going to be an impact on safety? Is it inevitable that some of these people that are released early will reoffend?
Well, I mean, recidivism rates are about 25% for people who are released from prison, so it is certainly a possibility. But these people are going to be released from prison anyway. We're just talking about people being released from prison a few weeks earlier than they would otherwise be. We're not talking about people getting, 10, 15 years off their sentence. And the last government was releasing people early as well, but rather under the radar. It was releasing people 70 days before the end of their sentences, and that impacted 10,000 released prisoners. So all governments, being honest about this, understand that we've got ourselves into the position where we simply have to do this. And that's a terrible risk, of course, but we have to do it. And what we really need to do is to invest much more, maybe some of that £600,000 per cell, invest more in probation services, in community services, and in other ways of dealing with people who commit less serious crimes. We shouldn't be using prison for people who are a nuisance. We should be using prison for people who are dangerous and a threat and have to be confined. And that's the approach that's taken by most other countries. We have, I think I said, by far the highest prison population in Western Europe. And we have to ask ourselves why that is. We don't commit any more crimes. British people aren't any nastier or more violent than German people or French people or Dutch people. We just make the decision to lock more people up. And I think the question to be asked now, and I think this is a question that Keir Starmer has shown he is asking by appointing James Timpson, the question is it working? Why are we doing it? Shouldn't we try a different approach?